My son looked me in the eye and promised, "Dad, it's just a signature." That signature was for a $750,000 loan that nearly destroyed me. He drained the money, abandoned me in the mess, and thought I'd crumble. But instead, I turned his greed into my victory and made him face the consequences of betraying his own father. Before I begin, please subscribe to Wise Revenge and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from. I grew up believing that the greatest purpose of my life was to provide for my family, and in many ways, that purpose became the very air I breathed. From the moment my son was born, I dedicated myself to him. I worked double shifts, sacrificed vacations, and lived with a constant ache in my bones from laboring long hours, but none of it ever felt like a burden. Every dollar I earned, every sleepless night I endured, was worth it when I saw him smile. I wanted him to have the life I never had, filled with opportunity, freedom, and dreams within his reach. When his mother passed away far too soon, it was just the two of us. That loss nearly broke me, but I couldn't collapse. I had to be strong, because he needed me more than ever. I became both father and mother, caretaker and guide, doing everything in my power to raise him into the man I hoped he would become. As he grew, I clung to every milestone like it was a treasure. His first steps, his first words, the day he graduated high school, I cried tears of pride at each one. People would tell me I spoiled him too much, that I gave him more than I should, but I brushed those comments aside. How could a father ever believe he was giving too much to his child? I only saw a boy who deserved the world, and I convinced myself that pouring everything into him would one day pay off when he became successful, and, more importantly, when he remembered the love I gave him. I imagined we'd share a bond stronger than steel, the kind of bond that nothing in this world could break. But life has a way of showing you truths you never want to see. As the years passed, my son grew into a man who was ambitious, yes, but also restless, always reaching for more, never satisfied with what he had. At first I admired it. I thought that fire was proof he was destined for greatness. But slowly I began to notice shadows in his eyes, a hunger that wasn't just for success, but for shortcuts and easy wins. I ignored the warning signs. I told myself he was young and still learning, that he'd mature into a man of integrity. After all, he was my son, and surely my sacrifices meant something. As my son stepped into adulthood, his ambitions only grew louder and bolder. He spoke of building empires, of living in penthouses above the city, of driving cars that turned heads wherever he went. At first, I admired the passion in his voice. I thought, this is what I worked for. This is why I spent years breaking my back, so my son could dream bigger than I ever could. But as time went on, I began to notice that his dreams were painted more with gold and glitter than with hard work and patience. He wanted success, but he wanted it fast. He wanted the world, but he didn't want to earn it. Still, whenever he looked at me with those determined eyes, I felt the same weakness I had always felt, the weakness of a father's love, willing to believe in his child no matter what. It wasn't long before his ambitions started bleeding into his conversations with me. He'd drop hints about opportunities that slipped just out of reach, about how close he was to making it big, if only he had just a little more support. At first I thought he meant encouragement, guidance, maybe a few words of wisdom, but soon enough I realized what he really wanted. He wanted me to open doors that he couldn't open himself, doors that required money, credibility, and security. He'd say things like, "Dad, you've always believed in me, right? You trust me, don't you?" And each time I would nod, because of course I did. Trust was the very foundation of our relationship, or at least I thought it was. The persuasion grew more intense over time. He'd remind me of all the sacrifices I had made for him, but twist them into reasons why I couldn't stop now. "You've always supported me. You've never let me fail. You wouldn't start now, would you?" He'd say those words with a half-smile that felt like both flattery and manipulation. I brushed off my unease, telling myself it was just the pressure of youth, that he didn't mean to sound so calculating. Yet deep down, a small part of me wondered if he knew exactly what he was doing. I found myself caught between pride and doubt, between the father who wanted to encourage his son and the man who knew that sometimes ambition can be dangerous. I should have listened to that voice inside me, the one whispering that something was wrong. But love makes you blind, and when it comes to your own child, it can also make you deaf. The night he finally came to me with the papers is etched in my memory like a scar. He arrived at my house late, his eyes wide with excitement and urgency, his hands clutching a thick folder. He sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once fed him as a baby, where I had helped him with homework, where I had told him bedtime stories to chase away his fears. Now, the roles had shifted, and he spoke with a rehearsed confidence that made me feel small. "Dad," he said, "this is it. This is the chance of a lifetime. The bank has already approved me, but they need a co-signer. It's only a formality. With you on board, I'll secure the loan, and in just a few years, we'll both be looking back at this moment as the start of something incredible." He pushed the folder toward me, as though it was a gift, but I couldn't shake the heaviness in my chest. I opened the folder and saw the number staring back at me, $750,000. My heart stuttered. I had never seen such a figure tied to my name. The air grew tight around me, and my hands trembled slightly as I traced the words on the page. He must have noticed my hesitation, because he leaned closer, his voice softening, almost pleading. "Dad, you've always told me to chase my dreams. This is my dream. I can make this work. I promise I won't let you down. Just sign this, and I'll handle the rest." His words wrapped around my heart like chains. I tried to reason with him, to tell him that such an amount carried risks beyond his imagination, that building something real takes time, patience, and humility, but he countered every concern with reassurances. "It's just paperwork. You won't even notice. The profits will cover everything, and soon enough you'll be proud you helped me." He placed his hand over mine, the way he used to when he was a boy asking for permission to go out and play. That simple gesture broke through the last of my defenses. I stared at the pen in my hand, the silence between us heavy with expectation. Somewhere deep inside, a voice screamed for me to stop, to protect myself, to set boundaries. But louder than that voice was the love I had carried for him since the day he was born. Against my better judgment, I signed, and in that moment, I handed over not just my signature, but a piece of my future I would never get back. The days after I signed the loan were filled with a strange mix of fear and pride. Fear, because I knew the weight of that number, $750,000, was no small responsibility. Pride, because I believed I had just helped my son take his first step toward greatness. I told myself that all parents worry, that I was only nervous because I had never taken such risks before. My son, on the other hand, walked with the swagger of a man who believed the world was finally within his grasp. He spoke with confidence about the company he was building, about the investors who were showing interest, about the clients who were lining up. Each time he came to me with updates, I allowed myself to smile. Maybe, I thought, this really is his moment. He invited me to see the office he had rented. It was bigger than anything I expected, sleek and polished, filled with bright lights and expensive furniture. Young people in sharp suits hurried around with laptops in their hands, greeting him as "Sir" and "Boss." Watching him walk through those doors, commanding respect, filled my chest with warmth. For a brief moment, I thought, this is the man I raised. This is the payoff for everything I sacrificed. I stood there in awe, proud and foolishly hopeful. There were celebratory dinners, nights when he'd take me to expensive restaurants and order wine I couldn't pronounce. He'd raise his glass to me and say, "To Dad, the man who made all this possible." Those words melted my doubts, soothing the unease I felt whenever I looked at the loan documents tucked away in my drawer at home. I wanted to believe in him so badly that I silenced every voice of reason in my head. In those early weeks, the energy around him was intoxicating. He seemed unstoppable, full of ideas and connections, always rushing from one meeting to another. Friends and relatives heard of his success and congratulated me, saying how lucky I was to have such a driven son. I accepted their praise with a modest smile, but inside I was bursting with pride. Perhaps I had been too cautious, too small-minded. Perhaps this was his way of proving that he could dream bigger than I ever dared to. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to relax. I thought the struggles of the past were finally giving way to a future brighter than anything I could have imagined. Little did I know, the storm was already forming on the horizon, and the pride I felt would soon turn into regret I could never wash away. At first, I convinced myself that everything I saw was normal for a new business. Growth required risk, I told myself. But the more I watched, the harder it became to silence the unease building inside me. My son wasn't just running a company, he was living like a king. He bought himself a luxury car that gleamed like liquid silver, the kind of car I had only ever admired from afar. He justified it by saying, "Dad, appearances matter. Clients need to see success to trust us." It sounded reasonable enough, but something about the extravagance gnawed at me. Soon, it wasn't just the car. It was the office parties he threw almost every weekend, each one more lavish than the last. He invited influencers, socialites, and anyone who could make his business look glamorous. Champagne flowed like water, music blared late into the night, and every corner of the office smelled of excess. I would stand quietly in the background, watching him laugh and pose for pictures, wondering how much of that borrowed money was evaporating into smoke and flashing lights. I tried to speak with him about it, gently at first. "Son, maybe you should slow down. Focus on the work, not the image," I said one evening, after watching him sign off on yet another extravagant catering order. He gave me a dismissive smile, the kind children give when they think their parents are too old-fashioned to understand. "Dad, relax. This is how business works these days. It's about networking, about making noise. Trust me, I know what I'm doing." But deep down, I knew he didn't. He was chasing glory, not stability. He was burning through money faster than the business could bring it in. The office that once impressed me now felt more like a stage set, a hollow show built on borrowed wealth. I wanted to believe that this was just a phase, that he'd eventually tighten the reins and steer the company toward real profit. But each time I visited, the signs grew harder to ignore. The staff turnover was high, employees whispered in corners about unpaid salaries, and investors who once showed interest now seemed to keep their distance. Yet my son remained blind, drowning in the illusion of success. He thought he was untouchable, but I could feel the ground trembling beneath him, and the terrifying truth was that when the floor gave way, it wouldn't just be him who fell, it would be me too. The first letter from the bank came in a plain envelope, almost unnoticeable among the usual bills and advertisements. But the moment I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a notice of late payment, written in cold, official language, reminding me that as a co-signer, I was equally responsible for the loan. My hands shook as I read the words again and again, hoping I had misunderstood, but there was no mistake. The clock had started ticking, and the responsibility was shifting onto my shoulders. I called my son immediately, my voice tight with panic. He answered casually, laughing in the background as if he were at another party. "Dad, don't worry," he said. "It's just a mix-up. I'll handle it." He brushed it off so easily that, against my better judgment, I let myself breathe again. But the letters didn't stop. They came more frequently, each one sterner than the last. Soon, it wasn't just letters. It was phone calls. Collectors began ringing my home at odd hours, their voices sharp and demanding. They didn't want excuses, they wanted payments. Each time I picked up the phone, I felt a wave of shame crash over me. I was a man who had worked honestly all his life, who had lived within his means, and now I was being treated like a fraud, like someone who had bitten off more than he could chew. I confronted my son again, this time with anger in my voice. "This isn't just a mix-up. They're calling me. They're threatening me. What are you doing with the money?" He rolled his eyes as though I were a child nagging him. "Dad, you worry too much. This is how startups work. You spend to grow, then the profits come. Trust me, it's all under control." His calm dismissal infuriated me, but worse than that, it frightened me. If he couldn't see the danger, then we were already standing at the edge of a cliff. Nights became unbearable. I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, hearing the words from the collectors echo in my ears. Every time the phone rang, my heart raced. I stopped answering sometimes, just to buy myself a moment of peace. But even then, the anxiety never left me. I realized that my son was not just careless. He was reckless, and his recklessness had chained me to a nightmare I could not escape. And still, I wanted to believe he would fix it. I wanted to believe my son wouldn't let me drown. The day the bank officials came to my door, everything I had tried to ignore came crashing down on me. Two men in suits stood on my porch, their expressions polite but firm, carrying clipboards and folders that seemed heavier than stone. They introduced themselves with professional smiles, but their words were sharp enough to pierce through the thin walls of denial I had built around myself. "Sir, as the co-signer of your son's loan, you are legally responsible for the outstanding balance. Payments have been missed, and this matter can no longer be delayed. Hearing those words spoken aloud, in my own home, felt like the floor had given way beneath me. My heart pounded in my chest, and all I could manage to say was, but this was supposed to be his responsibility. He promised. He said he had it under control. The officials exchanged a look that told me they had heard this excuse before from countless other desperate families. One of them sighed softly, then said, "Promises don't pay debts. You signed. That makes it yours too." Their words cut deeper than they probably realized. They left me with documents, deadlines, and a warning that if payments weren't made soon, legal action would follow. As I closed the door behind them, the silence in the house pressed down on me like a weight I couldn't carry. I called my son again, my voice trembling with anger. "They came to my door. Do you hear me? They said I'm responsible now. What are you doing about this?" His tone was annoyed, almost bored. "Dad, calm down. You're overreacting. I've got deals in motion. Big contracts are about to close. Once they do, this will all go away. You just have to be patient." But patience was no longer a luxury I could afford. The deadlines were clear, the numbers were real, and my son's reassurances sounded more like lies with every word he spoke. I hung up the phone and sat in the dark for hours, staring at the papers spread across the table. Numbers I couldn't fathom stared back at me, cold and unforgiving. I thought about all the nights I had worked overtime, all the sacrifices I had made to live a life free of debt and dishonor, and now here I was, shackled to a $750,000 nightmare because I had trusted too much. It was then that I began to realize my son had not simply made mistakes. He had abandoned responsibility, and whether he meant to or not, he had betrayed me. The calls became less frequent, then sporadic, and soon they stopped altogether. At first, I told myself he was busy, too overwhelmed with trying to save his company to return my calls. But as days turned into weeks, I realized the truth was far uglier. He was avoiding me. My messages went unanswered, my voicemails ignored. I even drove to his office one morning, desperate for answers, only to find the glass doors locked and the once bustling lobby eerily silent. Notices were taped across the entrance: overdue rent, unpaid utilities, warnings of repossession. The empire he had boasted about, the empire I had believed in, was crumbling into dust before my eyes. I sat in my car outside that building for hours, staring at the empty offices, remembering the pride I had once felt walking those same halls. I thought about the young employees who had greeted him as "Sir," the champagne toasts, the celebrations of early victories. All of it had been a facade, a performance to cover up a hollow core. And I had played my part in it, cheering him on, convincing myself that my son could do no wrong. At night, the loneliness pressed in harder. I would sit at the kitchen table surrounded by unopened bills and letters from the bank, each one a reminder of the hole I had been dragged into. I looked at old photographs of him as a boy, the gap-toothed grin, the scraped knees, the way he used to cling to my hand when he was afraid. My heart ached with the memory of that little boy, the one I would have given my life for. But the man he had become was a stranger. How could he turn his back on me so easily? How could he leave me to carry the weight of his recklessness while he vanished into silence? I started questioning everything. Had I spoiled him too much? Had I protected him so fiercely that he never learned accountability? Or was I simply blind, too desperate to see my son as a success story that I ignored the signs of his selfishness? These questions tormented me, circling my mind late into the night, stealing what little rest I could find. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal. He hadn't only left me with debt. He had left me with the shattering realization that the bond I thought was unbreakable had been nothing more than a fragile illusion. For weeks, I lived in a haze of despair, drowning under the weight of bills and shame, until one meeting changed everything. I had been summoned to the bank again, this time to discuss repayment plans. I expected another lecture about responsibility, another list of threats and deadlines. But as I sat across from the stern-faced manager, flipping through the documents, a detail caught my eye. The co-signer agreement didn't just tie me to the debt, it also granted me rights. As guarantor, I had a legal claim to the very company my son had abandoned. The words hit me like a jolt of electricity. I had been chained to his failure, but those same chains also gave me leverage. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of control return. That night, I spread every piece of paperwork across the kitchen table, my glasses perched low on my nose as I read line after line. The numbers still terrified me, but now I could see a path forward. If I stepped in, I could take possession of his collapsing business. It wasn't much, a hollow shell riddled with debts, but it was something I could work with. I had spent my life surviving on scraps, stretching every dollar, building stability out of nothing. Maybe I could do it again. The thought of cleaning up my son's mess filled me with both anger and determination. Anger, because I should never have been put in this position. Determination, because if he had walked away, then I would not let his recklessness destroy me as well. Somewhere deep inside, a fire began to burn. I realized that I had a choice. I could continue to sink under the weight of betrayal, or I could rise, take control, and turn his failure into my revenge. The next morning I met with a lawyer. He confirmed what I already suspected. "You have the right to take over," he said, sliding the documents back toward me. "It won't be easy, but if you're willing to fight, you can salvage what's left." Those words were both a warning and a challenge, and I accepted them. I walked out of that office with a new sense of purpose. My son had left me with nothing but ashes, but maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild from those ashes into something stronger than he had ever imagined. Walking into that office building again felt like stepping into the ruins of a battlefield. The glossy floors were still there, the sleek furniture still polished, but the air was heavy with silence. The laughter and chatter that once filled the halls were gone, replaced by whispers and empty desks. When I introduced myself as the new acting owner, the employees looked at me with a mix of relief and skepticism. They had heard stories about me, the father who signed away his future for his son, and now here I was, standing in the ashes, trying to claim authority. Some respected me instantly, recognizing that at least someone was stepping in. Others sneered, whispering that I was just another old man chasing what my son had already lost. I sat in my son's old office, the leather chair still warm from the arrogance he had left behind. Papers were scattered across the desk, unpaid invoices, overdue notices, contracts half finished and never honored. My head spun as I tried to make sense of the chaos. The financial books were worse than I had imagined. Money funneled into luxuries, debts stacked like dominoes waiting to fall. It was overwhelming, but I refused to let it crush me. I rolled up my sleeves and began sorting through every file, every receipt, every record of his reckless spending. If my son had dug a grave, I would not be buried in it. The employees were cautious around me at first, unsure if I was there to save them or to shut everything down. I called them into a meeting, my voice steady but heavy with resolve. "I won't lie to you," I said. "This company is drowning. My son abandoned it, and he abandoned all of you. But if you're willing to work with me, if you're willing to fight, I'll fight with you. We may not restore the dream he sold you, but we can build something real, something honest." For a moment, silence hung in the room. Then one by one, heads began to nod. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough to spark a glimmer of hope. Still, not everyone stayed. Some employees packed their things that very day, unwilling to gamble their futures on an old man with no business degree. I didn't blame them. But those who remained gave me strength. Together, we began picking through the rubble of my son's empire. And though my hands trembled from exhaustion, there was a new resolve burning in me. I would not let his betrayal define me. I would turn his failure into my revenge. The first weeks felt like digging through a landfill with bare hands. Every drawer I opened, every account I checked, revealed another disaster my son had left behind. Creditors were lined up like vultures, circling, each demanding to be fed first. There were leases for equipment we didn't need, contracts signed without any follow-through, and subscriptions to services no one in the company even used. The numbers bled red ink on every page, and I knew the only way forward was to make painful cuts. So I sold everything that wasn't essential. The luxury cars he had flaunted, the expensive artwork hanging in the lobby, even the designer coffee machines scattered around the office. All of it was liquidated. Each sale was a reminder of how recklessly he had lived, but also a small victory. Every dollar I recovered was one less nail in the coffin he had built for me. The hardest part was letting people go. There were employees who had been hired not for their skills, but for the image they created, for the glamour they added to his illusion of success. Telling them they no longer had jobs broke my heart, but keeping them would have sunk us all. I gathered them into the conference room, explained the situation as honestly as I could, and handed them their severance. Some left bitter, others in tears, but I knew I had no choice. Better a lean fighting crew than a bloated one doomed to collapse. At night, I would sit in that office long after everyone else had gone home, poring over spreadsheets with tired eyes. I had no degree in business, no experience running a company, yet here I was, learning as I went, fueled by sheer determination. I thought of all the times I had stretched a paycheck to feed my family, how I had fixed broken appliances with nothing but duct tape and grit. Those same instincts guided me now. Efficiency, discipline, survival. Bit by bit, I carved away the excess and found the core of something worth saving. The collectors still called, but now I had answers for them. We're restructuring. Payments are being made. Give me time. Some believed me, others didn't, but I no longer sounded like a desperate old man. I sounded like someone who was taking back control. And slowly, through sleepless nights and endless calculations, I began to see a faint path forward. The debt was still massive, but for the first time in months, I no longer felt like I was sinking. I was climbing. The ones who stayed were not the flashy, loud voices that had once filled the halls. They were the quiet workers, the ones who had always kept their heads down and done the job while my son had been busy showing off. At first, they were wary of me, unsure if I had the strength or the knowledge to guide the company. But I knew what I lacked in experience. I could make up for with honesty and discipline. So I gathered them together once more and spoke from the heart. I may not know everything about business, I admitted, but I know about hard work. I know about sacrifice. And I know that if we stand together, we can build something stronger than what was here before. There was no applause, no cheers, but I saw a change in their faces. For the first time in months, someone was speaking to them with sincerity instead of empty promises. I began learning from them as much as they learned from me. There was a young accountant who had quietly kept track of the chaos my son created, and she became my right hand in balancing the books. An older technician, who had nearly quit during my son's reign, showed me how much waste could be cut from the production floor if we focused on efficiency instead of appearances. These people became my allies, my teachers, my partners in rebuilding. Together, we replaced extravagance with discipline, chaos with structure. It wasn't easy. Many nights I questioned myself. I was exhausted, my health was strained, and the weight of responsibility never lifted. But each small victory gave me strength. The day we finally paid off one of the smaller creditors, I felt a surge of hope, unlike anything I had experienced in years. It was proof that we weren't just surviving, we were moving forward. Slowly, the company began to change. The lavish decor was gone, replaced by simple, functional spaces. The endless parties were a thing of the past, replaced by long hours of real work. And something remarkable began to happen. The people who remained started to believe again. They no longer worked for a reckless dreamer. They worked for a man who understood the value of sweat, sacrifice, and loyalty. That loyalty spread like fire through the halls. What had once been a hollow shell of arrogance was now becoming a team united by survival and determination. And as I watched this transformation take root, I realized something I had never expected. In saving the company, I was saving myself. Months of sacrifice and relentless effort slowly began to bear fruit. The red ink that had once stained every page of the books began to fade, replaced by small but steady profits. Clients who had walked away during my son's reckless reign started to return, drawn by the consistency and honesty we now offered. They no longer saw a business built on smoke and mirrors, but one that delivered on its promises. Each signed contract felt like a personal victory, proof that we were climbing out of the pit. I cannot describe the relief of opening the accounts one morning and seeing, for the first time, a balance that wasn't drowning in debt. It was modest, humble even, but it was ours. The energy in the office shifted. Where there had once been tension and whispers of failure, there was now focus and determination. People walked faster, spoke with more confidence, and even smiled again. They took pride in what they were building, not because it was glamorous, but because it was real. I made it a point to thank them personally for their efforts, to let them know their work was seen. That simple acknowledgement did more for morale than any party or flashy bonus my son had once thrown around. Loyalty, I learned, grows in the soil of respect. The business wasn't just surviving anymore, it was growing. We expanded cautiously, carefully, choosing projects that fit our strengths rather than chasing after flashy deals. We built a reputation for reliability, and slowly, word spread. I began receiving calls from clients who said they had heard of us through recommendations. For a company that had been on the brink of collapse, it felt like a resurrection. For the first time in a long time, I could walk through the office without the crushing weight of fear pressing down on me. I could breathe. At night, when I finally closed my eyes, the nightmares of debt collectors and legal threats were replaced with cautious optimism. I was still tired, still carrying scars from the betrayal, but I felt alive again. And yet, even as pride returned, the wound my son had left remained open. I had built something from the ruins he abandoned, but I knew deep inside that one day he would return. He would come back, not out of love, but out of desperation. And when that day arrived, I promised myself I would be ready. It happened on a rainy afternoon, months after the company had finally steadied itself. I was sitting in my office, reviewing contracts with the faint sound of rain tapping against the windows, when the door creaked open. I looked up, and there he was, my son. But he wasn't the confident, swaggering man who once boasted about building an empire. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and the arrogance that once clung to him like a shadow had been washed away. For a moment, I just stared, my heart twisting with emotions I couldn't untangle. He was still my son, but he was also the architect of my suffering. "Dad," he said softly, almost a whisper. His voice was stripped of all the bravado I remembered. "I messed up. I need your help." The words hung in the air like a confession. He stepped forward, hands trembling, and lowered himself into the chair across from me. "Everything's gone. The money, the friends, the opportunities. They all disappeared when the company collapsed. Nobody will take my calls anymore. I have nothing. I thought maybe you could give me another chance." My chest tightened as I listened. There was a time when those words would have broken me, when I would have rushed to comfort him, to tell him it would all be okay. But not anymore. I remembered the unanswered calls, the collectors at my door, the sleepless nights filled with dread. I remembered the silence of his betrayal. And now, here he was, not because he loved me, not because he cared, but because he had nowhere else to go. He tried to smile, as though pretending we could just go back to the way things were. "You've done amazing things here, Dad. I can see that. Let me come back. Let me be part of this. I know I can help." But I saw the flicker in his eyes, the same hunger for shortcuts, the same desire to take rather than give. He hadn't come to rebuild. He had come to claim what he thought was still his. For a long time, I said nothing, letting the weight of silence sit between us. My heart was torn between the love of a father and the scars of betrayal. And though the father in me longed to forgive, the man he had turned me into refused to forget. I leaned back in the chair and studied him for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until he shifted uncomfortably. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm but edged with steel. "You say you want another chance. But tell me, son, where were you when I needed you? Where were you when the bank hounded me, when collectors called at all hours, when I was drowning in the mess you created?" He lowered his eyes, unable to meet mine. His silence was answer enough. I stood, walked to the corner of the office, and returned with a mop I had asked the janitor to leave earlier that day. I placed it gently in front of him, the wooden handle resting against the edge of the desk. He looked at it, then at me, confusion flashing across his face. "What's this supposed to mean?" he asked, his voice shaking. "You said you want to work here," I replied evenly. "Then you can start here, by cleaning the floors. You'll work your way up, if you can prove you've changed. But the days of walking in and calling yourself the boss are over. This company isn't yours anymore. You forfeited that when you walked away and left me to pick up the pieces." His face flushed red, a mix of humiliation and anger. "You can't be serious. I'm your son. I should be—" I cut him off before he could finish. "You are my son, and I gave you everything. I gave you my trust, my savings, my peace of mind. And what did you give me in return? Lies, betrayal, silence. If you want to be part of this again, you'll start at the bottom, just like anyone else." The room grew quiet, except for the sound of the rain outside. He sat there frozen, staring at the mop as though it were a symbol of everything he had lost. And it was. The empire he thought he ruled was no longer his. The company he abandoned had been reborn without him, and the father he had once manipulated was no longer blind to his deceit. At last, he pushed the mop away, his pride refusing to let him touch it. Without another word, he stormed out of the office, the door slamming behind him. I watched him leave, my heart heavy but resolute. Revenge didn't always come in fire or fury. Sometimes it came in the quiet moment when the betrayer finally saw himself for what he truly was, powerless. When the echoes of the slammed door faded, I sat back down at my desk, staring at the empty chair across from me. For the first time in months, I felt an unexpected stillness inside me. The storm that had raged in my heart, the anger, the grief, the shame, had finally settled into something colder, quieter, but far stronger. I realized that revenge didn't have to be loud or cruel. It didn't have to involve shouting matches or dramatic scenes. True revenge was living, surviving, and thriving, despite the betrayal. True revenge was proving that the person who tried to bury you had only planted the seed for your rebirth. I thought about all the nights I had lost sleep, the collectors who had pounded on my door, the loneliness that had eaten away at me when my son abandoned me. And then I thought about where I was now, sitting in an office that was steady, surrounded by people who respected me, running a business I had saved with my own 2 hands. I had walked through fire and come out stronger. The man who once saw himself only as a victim of betrayal was gone. In his place stood someone who had taken control of his fate, even when it seemed impossible. I still grieved for the bond that had been broken. A part of me would always miss the boy who once clutched my hand with innocence and trust. But I knew now that the man he had become was not someone I could save. He had chosen greed, and he had abandoned me when I needed him most. My revenge was not to destroy him, but to show him that he no longer had power over me. His downfall had become my rise, and that was a truth he would never be able to erase. As I left the office that evening, the rain had stopped, and the sky was breaking open with streaks of light. I walked slowly, feeling the air fill my lungs with a sense of freedom I hadn't known in years. I had carried the weight of betrayal, but I had turned it into strength, and as I stepped into the quiet night, I whispered to myself, "You thought you broke me, but you only made me stronger." So if you are listening to this story, remember this. Betrayal cuts deep, but strength runs deeper. Never let the ones who use you define your end. Rise, rebuild, and take your revenge, not with hatred, but with triumph.